Welcome back to the Summit News Hour. We are live. We're going to get into the top story up on Summit News right now, which is about Spotify crossing the Rubicon into yet another form of censorship with flashbacks of socialist realism, which was when under the Soviet regime, only works of art that pleased and didn't offend Joseph Stalin and the Soviet regime would be allowed to exist, would not be blacklisted, would be funded. We see this in Hollywood. We see it in mass culture in general, and now we see it with song lyrics on Spotify, where they're literally banning song lyrics and deleting entire tracks from playlists from major artists because of, quote, misinformation in the song lyrics pertaining to COVID-19. They're that petrified about anyone having any divergent view from the technocratic elites that the level of censorship is now down to literal song lyrics by popular artists.
The people of America, the people of the world are taking their power back. And one way of doing it is locking up your cell phone when you're not using it so it's not tracking your location for contact tracers, the UN, the globalists, and hackers. And normally we sell out of these at $19.95, but we're selling them at $14.95 right now. That's 50% off retail. Get these privacy pockets today at InfoWarsStore.com while you still can. And I almost forgot, you got to use promo code PRIVACY to get that discount. Promo code PRIVACY for the privacy pocket.
So we see this stunning irony of leftists vehemently supporting these very lockdown policies which entrench power within governments, and with censorship of criticism of lockdown, criticism of the vaccine, which entrenched power within giant transnational corporations, suddenly realizing that that has a negative knock-on effect. They've suddenly realized that they've lost the right to protest. And that's why we saw the scenes on Clapham Common just a couple of nights ago with these feminists being manhandled. And they're pretending as if that's a new thing that's just suddenly appeared. No, you supported that from the very beginning. The Conservative government in the UK passed those laws where they literally banned the right to protest in the name of stopping super spreader events, in the name of social distancing, in the name of preventing the spread of the pandemic. You have a Labour Party, a so-called liberal opposition party in the United Kingdom, that again has vehemently supported and even called for more draconian censorship, more draconian banning of protests. And then you look at the polls in the UK, and it's 80+% of people, predominantly leftists, who supported that from the start. But now suddenly they're shocked that their protests are being banned. But only if their protests are being banned does it become a problem, when they literally signed on from it from the very beginning. And this is now expressing itself in terms of censorship with art. We now have Spotify, and the headline is Spotify now censoring song lyrics that contain misinformation, literally deleting tracks by major artists from their platform that criticize lockdown, that question the vaccine. And in this case, it's Ian Brown, who was probably one of the biggest frontmen in the United Kingdom throughout the 80s and the 90s with the Stone Roses, now, of course, with his solo career. In a flashback to how art that offended the Soviet regime was blacklisted, streaming giant Spotify is now censoring song lyrics that contain, quote, misinformation. What is misinformation? Anything that offends the technocratic elites, the scientific dictatorship. Ian Brown revealed that Spotify had deleted his anti-lockdown song Little Seed, Big Tree, which was originally released last September. He tweeted a couple of days ago, quote, Spotify stream the streams and censor artists like they have with my last song, took it down, just put it down the memory hole, free expression as revolution. And if you read the song lyrics to this track, he's basically talking about lockdowns, he's talking about mandatory vaccines. And again, Brown has been a vehement voice against lockdown and mandatory vaccines since basically the start, since a year ago when it first came into effect. In fact, he said numerous times that he will refuse to perform at music venues that mandate proof of COVID-19 vaccination as a condition of entry. And that started off with him trending on Twitter and being bashed by many of these same people who are now suddenly so shocked that they've lost the right to protest. Many of them criticized Ian Brown for his anti-lockdown stance. And in fact, Spotify put out a statement after they deleted his track. They said Spotify prohibits content on the platform which promotes dangerous, false, deceptive, or misleading content about COVID-19. So they're literally banning art which contradicts the narrative of the technocratic elite. It's not just political opinions. It's not just their narrow definition of hate speech, which is basically criticism of anyone who they can identify as a minority group. Now it's literally art. It's literally music. Now, if you go back in history, we've seen this before. And as I write in the article, it's a continuation of enforcing a monoculture of thought by ensuring any form of art that carries a message which offends technocratic elites is blacklisted. Because if you go back to the Soviet Empire under old Uncle Joe, art wasn't allowed to be publicly displayed. It wasn't allowed to be state funded unless it carried the same political message as the Soviet regime, as the Soviet elite. It was called socialist realism. It was the prescribed style of idealized art. This meant that every sculpture, statue, and painting had to conform to an established aesthetic in order to, quote, educate citizens on how to be the perfect Soviets. In order to entrench loyalty to the Communist Party and advance a utopian image of Soviet society, the purpose of socialist realism was to limit popular culture to a specific, highly regulated faction of emotional expression that promoted Soviet ideals. So again, it's about only incentivizing art, music that can be created, that can even become public and accessible to the general public by carrying a woke, diverse, social justice message. And as an artist, people know that if it doesn't have a kind of tokenism that gives a nod to that, even if it's not genuinely meant, it's never going to get exposed to the public. And as an artist, as a musician, they're going to fail because they're not towing the party line. And it was literally the party line back in Soviet days. Now it's the party line of the hashtag diversity, woke, technocratic elite. And in fact, I wrote an article, I think it was last year. In fact, it's here, headline, new purity test tool to scan Hollywood scripts for diversity bias. Major Hollywood studios are set to use a new tool that scans movie and TV scripts and flags up any examples where diversity is not portrayed positively in a chilling new development that has echoes of Soviet realism. So again, we saw, for example, with the Brits, they came out publicly and said, oh, the Brit nominations, the British Film Awards, is majority non-white. It's majority ethnic minority, even though the population of the United Kingdom at last count was 86% white. So if you truly wanted a meritocratic, equality-driven representation of artists in the form of those nominations, they wouldn't be majority BAME, they wouldn't be ethnic minority. This isn't equality. This is racist discrimination. But again, this is why these artists never speak out in the first place. This is why these artists, these musicians, these film directors, these actors and actresses can't even remain neutral on a political subject without being chased by the pitchfork mob, the woke cancel culture mob. So they've done it for Hollywood scripts. They've done it for art. You're not going to get your art in an art gallery now unless it has some kind of tokenist nod to political correctness, diversity, social justice. And now Spotify is doing it with song titles. They're now literally deleting songs which offend the sensitivities of the technocratic elite when it comes to the vaccine program and when it comes to social distancing, when it comes to the COVID-19 lockdowns. And on that subject, we have another headline here. Professor warns post-corona society is a national obedience contest. This was a Norwegian psychology professor called Charlotte Reed, who warns that our post-corona society has turned into a national obedience contest that will have a devastating effect on mental health for years to come. You know, everyone's really concerned about mental health. We've seen this phenomenon over the past 5-6 years where people say, oh, there's such a big stigma around mental health. The reason why it's getting worse is because we're not talking about it. And yet it seems the more we talk about it, the worse it gets. And that's why you get many people who go to university and they want to identify as being mentally ill because they think it makes them unique. When in fact, if you look at Stoicism, if you look at the classic example of the British stiff upper lip, we live in a society that is now emotionally incontinent, where we're supposed to be vulnerable, harassed, under constant attack for having our opinions challenged, to the point now where, for example, in Kew Gardens, and this is another headline, Kew Gardens to tell visitors how racist its plants are. Yeah, this is an actual story. This is not The Onion. Kew Gardens in London is to change labels on its plants and flowers in order to inform visitors on how racist they are. So now we're so precious, we're so ashamed of our culture, of our heritage, that they're now telling people that sugar canes were a result of slavery and that we now have to label this, we now have to genuflect, we now have to bow our heads in shame. All these plants are going to be labeled as racist, despite the fact that the Brits were literally the first people in the modern world to ban slavery. Slavery still exists in numerous countries across the world, throughout India, throughout the Middle East. Many of those countries, in fact, the vast majority are non-white countries. That's the problem in terms of modern day slavery. But no, the solution apparently is to label sugarcane plants racist. That's really going to solve it. The good news is that the actual culture that's being pushed in replacement of actual authentic culture, like Ian Brown and his anti-lockdown song, which has now been banned on Spotify, is being rejected in greater and greater numbers. Headline out of Information Liberation, Grammy ratings hit record low. Viewership crashes over 50% from last year. You have Cardi B and all these other degenerate artists training young girls to twerk, training them to become basically prostitutes. That's being rejected. But Ian Brown's song, which is anti-lockdown, that has to be deleted. That's going to wrap it up. Summit.news.